When a quiet black girl's braids were forcibly shaved off in the nurse's office, the school thought it was just another disciplinary moment. But that moment, recorded on a shaky phone by her best friend, ignited a firestorm. Arielle Daniels, 12, had hidden her alopecia for years. Her teacher exposed it in the cruelest way. What they didn't know, Arielle's mother was Lieutenant Colonel Naomi Daniels, deployed, decorated, and unrelenting. When Naomi returned in full uniform, courtroom battles, secret recordings, and a wave of national protest would follow. This isn't just a story about bullying, it's a story about power, protection, and justice unleashed. The electric hum of the trimmer buzzed like a swarm of angry wasps in the sterile silence of the school nurse's office. 12-year-old Arielle Daniels sat rigid in the vinyl chair, her long, carefully braided hair tumbling in thick ropes onto the tiled floor. Each braid that fell felt like a piece of her identity being stripped away. Beneath those braids was the truth Arielle had worked so hard to hide. Patches of scalp where her hair refused to grow. Alopecia had visited her young life since she was 9, but she had found solace in her art, in silence, and in the protective curtain of her braids. That safe world crumbled with each cruel sweep of the clippers. Watching nearby with arms crossed and a chilling look of authority was Miss Rourke's teacher, who observed the scene with the cold satisfaction of someone convinced they were fixing what needed no fixing. The nurse continued until Arielle's head was bare, until there was nothing left to cover. Outside that room, the world moved as usual. Inside, a quiet war had begun. What the school hadn't realized, what Miss Rourke could never have predicted, was that this wasn't just about school policy. It wasn't just about a hairstyle. It was about dignity, and it was about to become national. Maya Thompson, Ariel's closest friend since kindergarten, had filmed the entire incident from the hallway. Her hands trembled as she hit send, not to social media, but to the one person who would understand what this truly meant. The message crossed the ocean and landed squarely on the phone of Lieutenant Colonel Naomi Daniels. Arielle's mother, stationed on active duty overseas, a seasoned military officer who had led battalions into combat, Naomi had faced down powerful men, negotiated in war zones, and held her ground where others fled. But nothing could prepare the school for what she would do next. When Naomi walked through the front doors of the school 3 days later, her military uniform pressed sharp and her boots clicking with unwavering purpose, the halls fell into reverent silence. Conversations died mid-sentence. Students and teachers alike turned to watch. She wasn't just a mother returning home. She was a storm walking on 2 feet. And every single person watching finally understood this was never just about hair. It was about justice. "Miss Adams," Miss Rourke announced curtly as she pushed open the door to the nurse's office. "This student is in violation of the dress code. She claims to have a medical condition, but I reviewed her file. There's no record of any exemption." Nurse Adams looked up from her computer screen, her expression tightening the moment her eyes met Arielle's tear-streaked face. "Is there a problem here?" "It's her hair," Mr. Rourke said flatly, gesturing as if Arielle's braids were a crime. "It's too long, too elaborate. It's not compliant with the new appearance policy." Arielle took a shaky breath. "I have alopecia," she said softly, clinging to the hope that reason still existed. "My mom submitted the paperwork. Please." "Can you check?" Nurse Adams moved toward the filing cabinet, beginning to pull a folder but was cut off. "Don't bother," Mr. Rourke interjected. "I already checked this morning. There's a generic medical form, but nothing about hair. This exemption doesn't exist." It wasn't true, but Arielle, overwhelmed and alone, couldn't find the words to fight back. "My mom talked to Principal Wexley," she tried again, her voice trembling. "You can call her." "Isn't your mother deployed overseas?" Ms. Rora's voice softened just enough to be insincere, her gaze still icy. "Look, I get it. This is hard, but rules are rules. The extensions need to come out for cleanliness, for fairness." Nurse Adams hesitated, frowning. "Shouldn't we call her father first? We have parental contact info on file." I already have authorization," Zor cut in, lying again with confidence that dared to be questioned. This is a matter of school policy. We're allowed to enforce the dress code. Still uncertain, Nurse Adams looked between the teacher and the girl, only if there's proper authorization. There is, Miss Rohr said firmly. Now, do you have a trimmer? We need to get this done. Arielle's heart dropped into her stomach. Her voice broke into a desperate plea. No, please, you don't understand. My hair, it's all I have. But Miss Rohr was already ushering her toward the examination chair. Nurse Adams moved slowly, reluctantly retrieving the trimmer from the supply cabinet. This is for her benefit, Miss Rohr insisted, flipping the switch. The buzzing filled the room like a swarm of wasps. Arielle froze. Everyone follows the rules, the teacher said coolly. With a swift practice motion, she began unraveling the braids. One by one they fell, revealing the truth beneath. Patches of bare scalp, uneven and fragile. Arielle's condition was real, and now it was exposed. Tears streamed down Arielle's cheeks as her carefully maintained braids dropped to the ground. See? Miss Ache said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. That wasn't so bad. But she didn't stop there. The trimmer kept moving past the extensions through Arielle's natural hair. Her crown was shaved clean, stripped, erased. That's enough. Nurse Adams finally stepped forward, voice sharp, but it was too late. The damage was done. Arielle sat still, staring into the small mirror on the wall. The girl she saw looked nothing like herself. Her scalp stung in the cold air, her hands trembled in her lap. There, said Miss Rohr, switching off the machine. Now she complies. She turned to leave. I'll give you a few minutes to collect yourself, she added casually, placing the trimmer on the counter like it had never mattered. Then she walked out, heels clicking, shutting the door behind her. Nurse Adams stood frozen, horrified. I'm so sorry, she whispered, voice cracking. I didn't think she'd actually... I didn't know. She knelt beside Arielle. Do you want me to call your dad? But Arielle didn't answer. She curled inward, like her very spirit had been shaved away along with her hair. I'll call him, Nurse Adams said quickly, reaching for the phone. Just stay right here, sweetheart. She stepped into the hallway, leaving Arielle alone with her reflection. The girl in the mirror was no longer someone she recognized. Moments later, the door creaked open. It was Maya. She froze at the sight of her friend. Bare scalp, haunted eyes, hoodie draped loosely over thin shoulders. Without a word, Maya ran forward, pulled off her own hoodie, and gently placed it over Arielle's head, shielding her from the world. I saw everything, Maya whispered, voice thick with rage. I recorded it. My sister's going to help us. That woman, she won't get away with this. Arielle didn't speak. She pulled the hoodie tighter, hiding the rawness, the vulnerability, the pain. But inside her, something had shifted. That night, the video made its way online. It spread like fire. The school issued a hollow statement. A disciplinary misunderstanding occurred. The staff member involved has been suspended for 1 day pending investigation. The privacy of all parties will be respected. No mention of shaving, no mention of Arielle's condition, no apology, no ownership. In their silence, they betrayed a child. Back home, Arielle's father, Arielle Daniels, paced the living room, phone pressed to his ear. A former Army sergeant, he'd spent years managing crisis, but nothing had prepared him for this. Naomi, he said into the voicemail, voice heavy with dread, please call me. It's about Arielle. Something happened at school. It's bad. He hung up, rubbing his face with a shaking hand. Upstairs, Arielle hadn't said a word since he picked her up. She had simply handed him Maya's hoodie, walked to the car, and stared out the window the entire ride home. Eric had to swallow his fury, tamp down the urge to drive back to that school and demand justice. Arielle needed him grounded. So he held her hand, helped her to her room, and now she sat, curled up on the bed, hoodie pulled low, staring at nothing. Across town, Principal Thomas Wexley was holding an emergency meeting in his office. The curtains were drawn. His assistant had strict orders not to interrupt. This is a disaster, Wexley muttered, tugging at his tie. At 58, he'd hoped to coast into retirement quietly. No waves, no scandals. What were you thinking, Evelyn? Miss Rohr sat rigid in her chair. I followed protocol. The handbook is clear. The girl was compliant, Wexley snapped. Harold Brennan, the district's legal counsel, cleared his throat. The video doesn't show the full incident. If we spin it as a misunderstanding, Wexley exploded. She shaved a student's head. Part of the video is damning, Brennan said coolly, tapping his pen against his notebook. Her words toward the student are condescending at best, but with the new dress code in place, we can argue we were enforcing policy. Ms. Rohr nodded in agreement. The girl claimed she had some kind of medical condition, but there's no specific exemption listed in her file. Not about hair. Anything at all on alopecia? Principal Wexley asked, vaguely recalling a conversation buried beneath months of paperwork. I didn't see anything, Rohr replied, too fast to be convincing. Brennan didn't blink. Here's our play. We admit there was a disciplinary incident. We acknowledge that proper protocols might not have been followed, hence the one-day suspension. But we avoid mentioning any specific action. Student privacy laws give us cover. And if the parent presses the issue, Wexley asked. We propose private mediation, Brennan replied. Keep it out of court, offer counseling, maybe even suggest a class transfer. Wexley nodded slowly. Draft the statement. I want it out by tomorrow morning. While the adults planned damage control behind closed doors, Arielle sat in silence in her dimly lit bedroom. Her sketchbook lay open beside her, untouched. The bold characters she once drew, heroes who overcame impossible odds, now seemed like fiction from a world that had rejected her. She ran a hand across her scalp. The trimmer had been rough. Her skin felt uneven, sore. But it wasn't the pain that haunted her. It was the feeling of being erased. She could still hear the sound of the first braid hitting the floor, still see the twisted satisfaction in Mrs. Rohr's eyes. Downstairs, Eric knocked gently. Dinner's ready, sweetheart, he called. No response. Arielle, he opened the door a crack. She was facing the wall, wrapped in her blanket like a cocoon. He placed the plate on her desk. Just try to eat something, okay? Still nothing. I love you, Ari, he added softly. We're going to fix this. But even as he said it, he wondered, how do you fix this? How do you undo a wound that deep? Elsewhere, Maya Thompson sat at her sister Jasmine's kitchen table, nervously watching Jasmine upload the video.
Are you sure we should post this? Maya asked. Arielle's private. She may not want the world to see. This isn't just about Arielle, Jasmine said, eyes fierce. A sophomore in college and a rising activist, she'd seen too many stories buried under silence. This is about every black girl who's been punished for the way she looks. It's about power and those who abuse it. She clicked, upload, done. Now we wait. By sunrise, the clip had racked up over 10,000 views. The comment section ignited with outrage. Some demanded justice, others asked for the full story. Some defended the school. But the wave was building. Maya texted Arielle again and again. No reply. Meanwhile, in the art room, Jason Reed, Arielle's favorite teacher, caught wind of what had happened. Known for his brightly patterned bow ties and unshakable belief in his students, Mr. Reed didn't wait. He walked straight into Principal Wexley's office. Is it true? He demanded. Did Evelyn really shave Arielle Daniels' head? Wexley's expression didn't flicker. Jason, you know I can't comment on disciplinary matters involving staff. This isn't about staff, Reed snapped. It's about a sick 12-year-old girl who was publicly humiliated. You're handling it. Handling it. Reed's voice rose. By suspending Rohr for a single day. That's not handling. It's covering. Wexley's jaw tightened. Be careful, Jason. Your contract's up for renewal. I'd hate to see passion cloud your professionalism. Are you threatening me? Reed asked, stunned. I'm reminding you of the chain of command, Wexley said coldly, turning to his phone. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a call with the district in 5 minutes. That afternoon, Arielle Daniels found an unmarked envelope shoved under the front door. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Check the nurse's records. They know what really happened. His hands trembled as he read it again. Someone inside the system was reaching out. That night, Arielle finally slipped into sleep after hours of silent tears. But peace didn't come. In her dream, she stood alone on the school stage, her braids unraveled one by one, drifting to the floor like autumn leaves. The other students watched, their faces warping into cruel masks. They pointed. They laughed. And then Ms. Rourke appeared, towering, wielding a trimmer the size of a chainsaw. She smiled as she approached. Arielle screamed and woke with a start, her body slick with sweat. Eric rushed in, wrapping his arms around her as sobs racked her body. The first sound she'd made in nearly 24 hours. "It's okay, baby," he whispered. "Daddy's here. You're safe now." But they both knew that wasn't true. Not yet. The next morning, Eric called the district board demanding an emergency meeting. He was put on hold for 17 minutes before the secretary returned. The board will address the issue at its next scheduled meeting in 3 weeks. 3 weeks? Eric repeated, stunned. "My daughter was attacked. Yesterday?" "Sir, we understand your frustration, but we must follow protocol." Eric hung up, furious. They were stalling, hoping he'd give up. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Online, the video continued to gain momentum. Local news stations picked it up, though their tone was cautious. "An incident at a local middle school has sparked debate," one report began. The comment sections were split. Some called for Ms. Rohr's firing, others questioned the child's behavior. A few demanded to know why race had been brought into it. But others saw through the noise. Black girls' bodies are always under scrutiny. This isn't new. It's just finally being seen. The Daniels family didn't care about debates. They were living the consequences. And far away, at a remote U.S. military base, Lieutenant Colonel Naomi Daniels finally received her husband's encrypted message. Her iron composure, the same calm that had steadied soldiers in war zones, crumbled as she watched the video. Her daughter, being dragged out of a classroom, fear on her face. Attached was Eric's short, urgent note. "Arielle needs you. They shaved her head. All of it. She hasn't spoken in 2 days. I'm trying, but I don't know what to do." Naomi pressed her hand to her mouth, her breath catching. 20 years in uniform had prepared her for many battles, but not this one. Not an attack on her daughter. Not this level of cruelty. Within minutes, she was in her command center, filing for emergency family leave. She was coming home. And this time, she wasn't just a mother. She was the storm. Within hours, she was on a plane headed home. Naomi Daniels' face was a mask of tightly controlled fury, her thoughts racing with questions, calculations, and a silent vow. Someone had humiliated her daughter. Someone had dared to strip a 12-year-old girl of her dignity, and that someone was about to learn what it meant to cross a soldier's child. As the plane soared above continents, Naomi made a silent promise. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The late afternoon sun cast long, stretching shadows across the school parking lot as Lieutenant Colonel Naomi Daniels pulled into the guest space. She hadn't even been home long enough to change out of her uniform, and she hadn't wanted to. Her body ached from the 20-hour journey, but adrenaline coursed through her veins like electricity, keeping exhaustion at bay. "Remember what we talked about?" Eric said beside her, his voice tight with concern. "These people aren't worth your career." Naomi adjusted her hat in the rearview mirror, her usually warm brown eyes now cold and locked in. "I know exactly what I'm doing," she replied, her voice calm, so calm it was terrifying. "This isn't about my career, it's about our daughter." She had reviewed every angle during the flight home. As a commanding officer with years of battlefield leadership, Naomi understood one truth: raw emotion never wins a war. Precision does, control does, and that was the weapon she carried today. The school's hallway fell silent the moment her boots hit the tile floor in rhythmic taps. Conversations died mid-sentence. Students shrank back against their lockers. Teachers peeked out from classroom doors, only to retreat the moment they saw her. A military uniform commanded respect, but Naomi's presence demanded something deeper: accountability. One young teacher stepped forward, then hesitated and backed away. A security guard gave her a silent nod of recognition, an unspoken show of solidarity. Naomi didn't stop walking. She moved with the unwavering confidence of someone who knew exactly where to strike. She reached the teacher's lounge. The door was ajar. Inside, several staff members gathered around a coffee machine. Among them stood a thin woman with tightly pulled, salt-blonde hair. "Miss Rourke?" Naomi pushed the door open fully. Conversations halted. Ms. Rourke turned, cup in hand, her smile freezing the moment she recognized who stood in the doorway. Naomi saw it flash across her face. Fear. "Lieutenant Colonel Daniels?" Ms. Rourke stammered, her coffee cup trembling. "I didn't know you were back from deployment." "Obviously," Naomi replied icily, still standing in the doorway. Her voice filled the room like a storm. "I understand you've become quite familiar with my daughter." The teachers exchanged uncomfortable glances. One by one, they found reasons to slip out, avoiding Naomi's eyes as they left, until only Miss Rourke remained. "I was just enforcing the school's dress code," Miss Rourke said, trying to collect herself. "Maybe if you were more present." "Don't," Naomi cut her off. "Don't pretend this is about rules or enforcement. We both know better." The air crackled with unspoken history. "I don't know what you're implying," Miss Rourke began again, but her voice had lost all conviction. 8 years ago," Naomi said softly. "Fort Benning. Ring a bell, Private Rourke? Or did you think I wouldn't recognize you?" Color drained from Miss Rourke's face. "You were in my training unit," Naomi continued, "dishonorably discharged after multiple violations and failures to meet even the basic standards." "That was different," Miss Rourke whispered. "You had it out for me from day one." "No," Naomi said, her tone steel. "You couldn't follow orders. And you filed false reports against black soldiers. Sound familiar?" Miss Rourke set her cup down, hands shaking. "You couldn't prove it back then. You can't now." "I don't need to prove anything. I lived through it. And now, so is my daughter." Naomi stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut like glass. "This isn't over, Evelyn. Not even close." She turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. If you come near my daughter again, you'll understand exactly why they called me the Hammer." With that, Naomi strode down the hallway toward the principal's office. Her pulse was steady, her mind sharp, but her memory burned. Evelyn Rourke had always been a problem, undermining black soldiers, whining about fairness when discipline was enforced, claiming to be the victim every time she was held accountable. Now she held power over children. That realization alone nearly made Naomi lose her composure, but not today. Outside the principal's office, the secretary rose. "Do you have an appointment?" "They'll see me," Naomi said without stopping. She opened the door without knocking. Principal Wexley looked up from his computer, irritation briefly flashing across his face, until he saw her. "Miss Daniels," he began. "Lieutenant Colonel Daniels," Naomi corrected. "And you should have been expecting me the moment your teacher humiliated my daughter." Wexley motioned to a seat. "Please, I understand you're upset." "I'm not upset, Mr. Wexley. I'm focused. There's a difference." She set a thick folder on his desk. It was military standard, marked and categorized. "What is this?" Wexley asked, eyes narrowing. "Your blueprint," Naomi said. "It's how a professional handles abuse." Inside were witness affidavits, a timeline of events, photographs of the incident, Arielle's medical evaluations, and copies of every document her family had submitted to the school in the past year. Wexley's polished confidence began to crack. "Let's not rush to call this discipline," Wexley said. Naomi Daniels looked him square in the eye. "A one-day suspension is not discipline," she replied sharply. "It's a vacation." She tapped the thick folder in front of her. "Inside, you'll find documented incidents of Ms. Rohr's past behavior. Patterns of racially motivated targeting. Arielle isn't her first victim, just the first one she humiliated this publicly." Wexley's expression darkened. "These are serious allegations." "They are not allegations," Naomi said evenly. "They're facts, recorded, time-stamped, and ready to be submitted to the school board, to the State Department of Education, and, if necessary, to the press." "You jeopardize this school's reputation over one incident," Wexley asked, disbelief dripping from his voice. Naomi didn't flinch. "And you're willing to sacrifice my daughter's dignity, her mental health, and her right to learn without prejudice. I'd say we're not even close to balanced." That same afternoon, Evelyn Rohr sat in a small makeup room at the local news station. Her hands fidgeted as a producer clipped a microphone to her blouse. "We're going live in 3 minutes," the producer said briskly. "Stick to your talking points." Rohr nodded, trying to muster a look of polished remorse. When the red light blinked on, her face shifted into its most practiced mask, that of a wounded educator. "Thank you for having me," she began. "It's important the public hears the truth." "And what is the truth, Miss Rohr?" the host asked calmly. "I was doing my job," Rohr said, her voice quivering just enough to play sympathy. "The school recently implemented a strict dress code. As educators, we are responsible for upholding those standards." She continued. "The student in question had been warned multiple times. Her family insists she has a medical condition, but we had no documentation to verify that." "But there was a diagnosis, alopecia, correct?" the host interjected. "There was no hair exemption in her file," Rohr snapped, then caught herself. "Frankly, I believe this is being exaggerated because her mother is in the military. She's playing the hero, threatening the school, but where was she when her daughter needed to be taught discipline?" The host raised an eyebrow at the personal attack, but before she could respond, Rohr pressed on. "I've spent 20 years in the classroom. My reputation is being dragged through the mud because one parent thinks the rules don't apply to her child?" Across town, Arielle Daniels returned to the school late that night, haunted by the anonymous note, "Check the nurse's records." Waiting by the side entrance was a man in a school security uniform. "Frank Williams," he introduced himself quietly. "My daughter was in Miss Rohr's class 3 years ago. Trust me, I've seen what she's capable of."
"Thank you," Eric said, shaking his hand. "I appreciate this more than you know." "I don't want trouble," Frank said, shrugging, "but some things matter more than a paycheck. The nurse's office is down the hall, third door on the left. The records are in the cabinet marked Medical Alert." Eric moved quickly through the darkened corridor, flashlight in hand. The nurse's office was unlocked, just as Frank had promised. Inside, he rifled through the filing cabinet until he found it, a complaint form, filed by Arielle 2 weeks earlier. In her handwriting, she had described how Ms. Rohr repeatedly made comments about her hair, calling it unprofessional and distracting. The form was signed, dated, but at the bottom, in red ink, someone had scrawled, "No action required." Eric snapped a photo, his hands trembling. They knew, they were warned, and they did nothing. Back home, Naomi was at her desk, carefully filing formal complaints to every relevant authority: the State Board of Education, the Office of Civil Rights, the ACLU, the National Association of School Principals. Her documentation was precise, her memory sharp. Every detail, every timestamp, every thread of injustice submitted. It was past midnight when she peeked into Arielle's room. Her daughter had finally drifted off to sleep, the sketchbook clutched gently to her chest. In the kitchen, Eric showed Naomi the photos. Her jaw clenched. They knew, he said, voice breaking. Our little girl tried to tell them and they ignored her. Naomi scanned the document. That's Wexley's signature. He saw it. He refused to act. Her voice hardened. They will regret that decision. The next morning, Principal Wexley summoned Jason Reed to his office. The art teacher entered with tired eyes and steady resolve until he spotted the district attorney seated nearby. Jason, Wexley said flatly, effective immediately, you're being placed on administrative leave. Reed blinked. On what grounds? Disrupting the educational environment, Wexley said. There are parent complaints that you've been discussing the Daniels situation in class. That's not true, Reed snapped. I told my students to show compassion to classmates going through tough times. Their contract prohibits discussing controversial topics in class, the lawyer interjected. You'll receive paid leave. Please turn in your keys and clear your desk by noon. Reed rose slowly, his voice low but sharp. Everyone here knows what happened to that girl was wrong. And this is how you respond? By silencing anyone who speaks the truth? That will be all, Mr. Reed, Wexley said coldly. News of Reed's forced leave spread like wildfire through the school. And Naomi was ready. Wearing her polished military uniform and shining medals, she appeared on national morning television. Across from the host, she sat with unwavering calm as the cameras rolled. Lieutenant Colonel Daniels, thank you for joining us, the host said. Can you tell us what happened to your daughter? Naomi looked straight into the lens. Her voice didn't waver. My daughter Arielle suffers from a condition called alopecia. It causes severe hair loss. She wears protective extensions to guard her scalp and preserve her privacy. Last week, a teacher at her school forcibly shaved her head in front of her peers without our consent. The host nodded, solemn. The school is calling it a misunderstanding. Naomi held her gaze. It wasn't. There was no misunderstanding, Naomi said, her voice firm and unwavering. This was deliberate cruelty and a cover-up by the institution. We submitted every valid medical waiver. And my daughter, she filed a formal complaint about this teacher 2 weeks before the incident. Your school ignored every warning. The room fell silent. Wexley glanced down, speechless. Naomi leaned in slightly, her eyes locked on him, not in rage, but in clarity and power. I'm seeking justice for my daughter and for every child who's been humiliated, dismissed, or hurt while the adults looked away. This ends here. She paused for breath, then added with calm force, I've served this country for 20 years. I've defended the values we claim to hold, dignity, equality, and protection of the vulnerable. And if the system I served can't protect my daughter, then I'll tear it down myself and build something better. Those final words weren't just a declaration. They were a matchstick. The interview ended, but Naomi's words ignited a fire that raced across social media like dry brush in wind. Within hours, the video had passed 2 million views. By nightfall, her speech had gone viral on every major platform, especially one sentence. If the system doesn't protect my daughter, I'll destroy it myself. The Daniels phone rang nonstop. News stations requested interviews, parents shared their own horror stories, civil rights groups offered pro bono legal teams. Eric managed the flood of calls, carefully noting each name and number while Naomi met with their attorneys and strategized their next move. But above all, their attention was on Arielle. Their daughter remained quiet, withdrawn. She barely spoke, barely ate. The sketches that once burst with color and joy had turned into shadowy spirals and jagged lines. The girl who once painted sunrises now filled her pages with gray storms and faceless silhouettes. Still, she clung to her sketchbook like a lifeline. And in that silence, she survived. By morning, a small group had gathered outside Lakeside Middle School. It began with 5 parents, then 10, then 20. By midday, a full crowd stood at the gates, parents, students, alumni, holding signs that read, "Justice for Arielle." protect our kids. Accountability starts here. Among them was Maya, a quiet eighth grader who had often sat beside Ariel in art class. She arrived with her mother and younger sister, Jasmine. When reporters asked Maya to speak, she shook her head gently. "I'm here for my friend," she whispered. But Jasmine, fierce and unafraid, stepped forward. "This isn't a one-time thing," she said into the microphone. "Ms. Rohr has targeted students of color for years. Just ask anyone who's been here." Her words sparked a flood online. Former students from different years began sharing their own stories. She made me wipe off my makeup and said it was too ethnic. She called my natural hair unprofessional. She refused to say my name all year and just called me Amy instead of Amara. Each voice added a stone to the weight of evidence. What was once written off as discipline could now be seen clearly for what it was, a pattern of racial microaggressions hiding behind school policy. Inside the school, tension thickened. Students whispered in hallways. Teachers measured every word. The air was heavy with fear and scrutiny. But outside, momentum built. That night, Naomi received an email from a name she didn't recognize, Alex Baker, a technician at the school. "Miss Daniels, I've been following what happened. There's something you should know. There was security footage from the nurse's office. Principal Wexley told me to delete it. I said it was lost, but I recovered it from our backup system. If you're interested, we can meet off Mancus." Naomi forwarded to her legal team immediately. This could be the evidence they needed, the moment Arielle was shamed. Uncut, unfiltered, undeniable. But Alex never showed. 2 days passed, no message, no call, nothing. Naomi dialed the number he'd left, straight to voicemail. Just as she considered filing a missing person report, a new message came in from an unknown number. "Tell your hackers to stop digging, or we'll bury him." A chill crept down her spine. She immediately contacted her cybercrime contacts in the military and then dialed Eric. "They're threatening Alex," she said. "Whoever this is, it's not just about the school anymore." Eric hesitated. "You think Wexley's involved?" "Maybe not him directly," Naomi replied, "but someone's pulling strings, and we're getting close." As Naomi chased down truth and shadows, Arielle remained at home, still avoiding school, still healing. But something began to shift. One morning, Naomi peeked into her daughter's room. Arielle was painting again, not the dark chaos of before. This time, it was different. A leafless tree stood in the center of her canvas. Its branches reached out like longing arms. Most of its leaves had fallen and scattered around the roots, but in the corner, barely visible, a tiny green sprout broke through the earth. Naomi stood in the doorway, stunned. "It's beautiful, baby," she whispered. Arielle didn't speak, but for the first time since the incident, she looked up right into her mother's eyes. Her gaze held depth, pain, strength, and something Naomi hadn't seen in weeks. Oh. While the Daniels family focused on healing, the public firestorm raged on. Right-wing media painted Naomi as an extremist, a soldier abusing her status. "Is this military interference in public education?" one pundit asked. "He's intimidating the system," said another. Naomi said nothing until she was ready. She stood before her home in civilian clothes. At a press conference, she called herself. Microphones lined the front lawn. Her posture was as upright as ever. But this wasn't Lieutenant Colonel Daniels. This was Arielle's mother. "I've heard the accusations," she began, "that I'm using my rank to threaten educators. So let me be clear. I'm not here in uniform. I'm not here as a soldier. I'm here as a parent." She raised a folder and listed what they'd collected: medical documents, Arielle's ignored complaint, witness accounts, and public contradictions by the school. "This isn't a military tactic," she said. "This is what any parent would do. The only difference is my training taught me to be precise, strategic, and maybe that makes people uncomfortable, but maybe you should ask yourself why." She ended with a message, not to the press, but to the millions of parents watching from living rooms and kitchen tables across America. If your child has ever been hurt, shamed, or dismissed by the very people trusted to protect them, don't stay silent, speak, fight, demand better. Contact us. There is power in our shared voice. The message was clear, spoken not in rage, but in calm, unwavering conviction. Naomi's press conference wasn't just a public statement. It was a masterclass in clarity, poise, and controlled fire. No emotional outbursts, no reckless accusations, just a mother, disciplined, determined, and unstoppable, fighting for her child with everything she had. The following day, Superintendent Richard Palmer held a press conference of his own at the district headquarters. Flanked by the school board chair and two stone-faced attorneys, he addressed a room full of cameras. "We are launching a reform task force," Palmer announced, "to reevaluate our district's disciplinary policies and dress code standards." Without ever mentioning Arielle's name, he promised sweeping reforms, mandatory sensitivity training, a review of past dress code violations over the last 3 years, and a vague commitment to transparency. When asked about the specific incident involving the alleged shaving, Palmer offered nothing. "We are unable to comment on ongoing investigations or matters involving student privacy." Watching from home, Naomi scoffed. "Optics, not justice," she muttered to Eric. "They're stalling, hoping the headlines fade." Eric hesitated. Maybe it's time to consider something else. A private school, a new start. Somewhere Arielle can heal. Naomi turned sharply. "You want to run?" "I want my daughter back," Eric said, his voice cracking. "The girl who used to laugh, who didn't flinch every time someone walked past her room." Naomi didn't flinch. "And what about the next girl? The next Arielle who crosses paths with another Rourke or Wexley? If we run now, how many more will suffer in silence?" Eric's voice shook. "That's not fair." "No," Naomi said, "it's not hypothetical. It's real. And right now they're waiting, every one of them, for someone to say, 'Enough.'" Before they could continue, Naomi's phone buzzed. It was a message from Maya. "Something's coming," it read. 20 minutes later, Maya sat at the Daniels' kitchen table, nervously clutching her phone, which was connected to her laptop. On the screen, a screenshot of a private group chat between Ms. Rourke and another teacher, dated the morning of the incident. "My friend's sister teaches at Lakeside," Maya explained. "She used to be in the group chat. Ms. Rourke kicked her out after finding out we were close, but she saved these." Naomi and Eric leaned in. The messages chilled them.
"Miss Roar, that little Daniels girl tested me again today, sketching in class instead of taking notes." The teacher. "The quiet one with the braids? Isn't she one of our top students?" "Miss Roar, don't be fooled. She's been giving me attitude for weeks." Their teacher. "Maybe just let it go. Her mom's away, dad's raising her." Miss Roar. "No, I'm going to teach this one a lesson she'll never forget." The timestamp was damning. Just 30 minutes before Arielle's public humiliation. "She planned it," Naomi said softly. "This wasn't discipline. It was a setup." "Can we use this in court?" Eric asked. "Absolutely," Naomi replied. "And Maya, your friend's sister, would she testify?" "She said she would," Maya nodded. "She feels terrible for staying silent this long." That night, after Maya had gone and Eric had fallen asleep on the couch, Naomi checked in on Arielle one last time. She expected to find her asleep, but instead found her daughter sitting up, sketchbook open in her lap. "Can't sleep?" Naomi asked gently, sitting beside her. Arielle shook her head, then turned the sketchbook to show her mother. On the page, two figures standing side by side, one in military uniform, tall and strong, the other, smaller, with a bald head, smiling up at her. Naomi's throat tightened. "It's beautiful," she said. "Is that us?" Arielle nodded. And then, for the first time in days, she spoke. Just 5 words. A whisper. But they hit like thunder. "Don't let them win, Mom." Naomi pulled her daughter into her arms. "I won't," she promised, holding her tightly. "I swear to you, I won't." Grace Yamada's office sat on the 15th floor of a sleek downtown high-rise. Its minimalist design was softened by bamboo plants in the corners and black and white portraits of civil rights protests lining the walls. Naomi sat straight-backed on the leather couch, posture still military even in civilian clothes. Eric sat beside her, hands clasped. Across from them, Grace reviewed the evidence spread across her glass coffee table: medical records, school policies, witness statements, and the explosive screenshots from Rourke's chat. At 42, Grace Yamada was one of the state's most respected civil rights attorneys. The daughter of Japanese-American survivors of internment camps, she had built her career dismantling institutional injustice: school districts, police departments, city halls. Her name was whispered like a warning across courtrooms. "You've done your homework," Grace said, scanning the documents. "Most clients come in with raw emotion and nothing else. But you brought me a case." "Military training," Naomi said simply. "Document everything." Grace nodded, then leaned forward. "Let me be clear. The district has money, lawyers, political connections. They will try to delay, dismiss, and bury this with red tape. Are you prepared for a long war?" "We're ready for whatever it takes," Eric said firmly. Grace smiled. "Good," she said, "because they're not." Naomi slid the final page into a crisp, aligned stack and set it on the table with intention. "I'm not just filing a complaint," she said calmly. "I'm filing a lawsuit for several $1 million in damages." She didn't flinch as she spoke the names aloud. Defendants: Principal Arthur Wexley and Ms. Evelyn Rourke. The charges: assault, negligence, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and civil rights violations. She paused, not for drama but for clarity. "This is going to escalate," her lawyer, Grace Yamada, warned gently. "They'll come after your reputation, your parenting, even your military record." Naomi's expression didn't move. "They can try." The next morning, while Grace and her team finalized legal filings, Evelyn Rourke heard a knock at the front door of her modest home on the outskirts of town. When she opened it, a sharply dressed man stood on her porch. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, carried a leather briefcase, and smiled like a man used to calming storms. "Ms. Rourke," he greeted. "I'm Lawrence Whitfield. I'd like to discuss your legal options." Evelyn narrowed her eyes. "I can't afford a lawyer." "You don't need to," Whitfield replied smoothly. "My services have already been arranged." She hesitated. "By who?" "Let's just say interested parties. People who recognize this case has larger implications. People who understand the importance of tradition, of institutional authority." He stepped inside, setting his business card gently on her coffee table. Evelyn, sensing validation, exhaled. "So, they believe I was just doing my job?" Whitfield nodded. "Of course. And we'll make sure everyone else sees it that way, too." What Evelyn didn't know was that Whitfield's firm had received a generous retainer from a private fund tied to 3 members of the school board, a fund originally created for employee support, but secretly used to protect the district from legal exposure. The lawsuit was filed that weekend. Given the nature of the case, abuse involving a minor, the judge granted an emergency hearing. Outside the courthouse, the scene was electric. Protesters clutched signs reading, "Justice for Arielle" and "Protect our children." Others, fewer but loud, held banners defending educators. News cameras flashed from every angle. Reporters swarmed the steps. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Naomi entered in full uniform. Her medals caught the light above her with every step. Arielle wasn't with her, but Naomi carried her daughter's pain in every breath. Across the aisle sat Evelyn Rourke, dressed in a plain navy dress, likely chosen to make her seem humble. At her side, Lawrence Whitfield shuffled his notes with a serene confidence. Principal Wexley sat at the far table, flanked by the school district's legal team. Their body language was intentional, distant, detached. They would try to disown Evelyn's actions without admitting fault. The judge entered. "Court is now in session," announced Judge Eleanor Barnes, a respected jurist known for her no-nonsense demeanor. Before the proceedings began, she raised a hand. "I want to remind everyone, this courtroom is not a theater. Regardless of the media frenzy outside, we will conduct ourselves with dignity." Then she turned to Grace. "Counselor Yamada, your opening statement?" Grace stepped forward. Her voice was clear, deliberate. "This is not a story of misunderstanding," she said. "This is a story of abuse, of power, trust, and vulnerability." She paused, then looked toward the gallery. A teacher entrusted with the care of children forcibly shaved a 12-year-old girl's head. A girl who suffers from alopecia, a medical condition that affects not just her health, but her identity. Gasps rippled through the audience. The school ignored medical documents, dismissed formal complaints, destroyed evidence, and retaliated against staff who tried to speak out. This was not one mistake, it was a system-wide failure. When the defense rose, Wexley's attorney moved first. "We do not deny that an unfortunate event took place," he said. But Principal Wexley was not involved. With over 800 students to manage, he delegates daily matters to his staff. The moment he became aware of what happened, he suspended Ms. Rourke. Whitfield followed next, his tone even silkier. "My client, Miss Rourke, was simply enforcing the school's dress code. She was never informed of Arielle's medical exemption. She acted based on what she believed were the correct procedures. This is, at worst, a tragic communication breakdown, not malicious intent." Grace remained impassive. She had anticipated this line of defense. She was ready. She called her first witness, the school nurse. "Please state your name for the record." "Patricia Adams." "And your role?" "I'm the school nurse at Lakeside Middle." Grace leaned in slightly. "Mrs. Adams, what happened when Arielle Daniels was brought to your office?" The nurse wrung her hands. "Mrs. Rourke told me Arielle was in violation of the dress code. When Arielle mentioned her condition, Miss Rourke said she checked and found no exemptions on file." Grace's voice was gentle but precise. "Did you verify the records?" "No, I didn't," the nurse admitted, voice barely audible. "Ms. Rourke insisted it was handled. Did she show you any documentation?" "No." "Did she contact Arielle's parents?" "No." "But she asked you to provide the electric trimmer used on Arielle." The nurse's eyes welled with tears. "Yes, and that is the greatest regret of my professional life." The room held its breath. Then Whitfield stood for cross-examination. He began to shift the blame toward the nurse. "Is it not your responsibility," he asked smoothly, "to verify medical exemptions? After all, you're the health officer on site." Grace stood. "Objection. Counsel is attempting to deflect responsibility from his client by assigning medical oversight retroactively. The nurse was under pressure and acting on direct instruction from the defendant." Judge Barnes nodded. "Sustained." Whitfield withdrew, flashing a practiced smile. But Grace knew that smile was hollow, and tomorrow she would wipe it clean. The courtroom fell into a tense hush as the defense attempted to shift focus. "The district followed proper procedure," their attorney insisted. "The matter lies with how individual staff interpreted the policy." Judge Barnes adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Whitfield, I'd like you to remain focused on the actions taken by your client. How long do you think that Daniels woman will hold out?" Patterson laughed. "A week, 2? "She'll fold once we offer her a settlement," Simmons added. "Military folks know their place when command speaks." "And if not," Walsh chimed in, chuckling, "Judge Ford still owes me a favor for pushing through his lakeside zoning request. He'll play ball." The implication was unmistakable. The board planned to leverage judicial connections to sabotage Naomi's case. Naomi's jaw tightened. She forwarded the video to Grace and Malik instantly, along with a copy of the anonymous threat Alex had received. The very next day, Malik published a bombshell follow-up. Exposed, school board caught plotting judicial interference. Secret recording reveals plans to undermine civil trial. He made sure never to name Alex as the source, shielding the whistleblower while detonating the scandal. The public outcry was thunderous. Protesters gathered outside the county education offices by the hundreds. Their chants, "Resign now, and our kids deserve better," could be heard blocks away. The State Board of Education launched an emergency investigation within hours. And within 48 hours, the House of Cards collapsed. Patterson, Simmons, and Walsh each announced their resignations, blaming health reasons and personal matters. But everyone knew the truth. Their exits triggered special elections, opening the door for new candidates, including parents from the advocacy groups formed during Arielle's fight. A grassroots movement was born, one fueled not by politics, but by protection. Meanwhile, the support structure shielding Evelyn Rourke crumbled. And then came another voice. A live stream featuring a soft-spoken young woman named Tasha Williams began circulating online. Within 12 hours, it had over 1 million views. "I was 14 when it happened," Tasha began. Her eyes were calm, but her pain was raw. "Ms. Rohr was my English teacher in another district." She described the moment Ms. Rohr told her that her braided hairstyle was unprofessional and would limit her future. When Tasha spoke up, Ms. Rohr picked up a pair of scissors and, in front of the entire class, cut off one of her braids. Her voice trembled. "I told the school, they said I was exaggerating." But now, with Arielle's story everywhere, Tasha finally felt heard. "I thought I was the only one. I want Arielle to know she's not alone." That one video opened a floodgate. Alumni, former students, and even past co-workers began to share their own stories. Some were subtle, comments about their names, their accents, their hair. Others were more direct. Humiliation, sabotage, and cultural erasure. Together, the evidence formed a clear and devastating pattern. Evelyn Rohr was no longer just a strict teacher who made a mistake. She was exposed as a serial abuser protected by a broken system. Within days after further investigation and sworn testimonies from multiple students, she was formally arrested on multiple counts related to assault, misconduct, and civil rights violations. And still, amid the storm, Arielle stayed home. She couldn't return to Lakeside. Not yet. The halls still echoed with memories she wasn't ready to face. The tiles still held the echoes of her silence. But one afternoon, it was Arielle who asked to return. "Are you sure?" Eric asked softly. She nodded, her voice steady. "I need to say thank you." The visit was arranged for after school, when the hallways were mostly empty and quiet. As the three of them walked down the familiar corridors, Arielle clutched Naomi's hand a little tighter. But she didn't stop walking. She was ready, at least for this. Mr. Reed waited for them in his old art classroom. He had temporarily reclaimed the space just for this meeting, leaving the sterile admin desk behind. "Arielle," he greeted her warmly, "there's something I want to show you." He led her to the back wall of the room, once cluttered with scattered student sketches, now transformed into a precise and reverent display. Her paintings from the exhibition had been reprinted and mounted in a perfect grid. At the center, in elegant lettering, were the words, "Art speaks when words no longer can." Arielle stared at the display. Her breathing hitched. Emotion rose in quiet, powerful waves across her face. Then, for the first time since that awful afternoon in the nurse's office, she smiled. Not a forced smile, a real one. It didn't erase the pain. It didn't erase the trauma. but it flickered like a spark, reaching into the part of her that once felt whole. The part still capable of creating beauty from brokenness. It was the beginning of something new. The promise that while they couldn't undo the past, they could build something stronger from the ashes. The rain pattered against the courthouse windows, tracing soft, ghostly shadows across the benches. 6 long weeks of witness testimony, cross-examinations, documents, and sleepless nights had led to this day, the final day of trial. By sunrise, journalists had already begun lining up outside. Spectators clutched umbrellas and homemade signs. The courtroom was packed. Arielle sat between her parents. Her head was wrapped in a beautiful scarf, a soft cotton wrap in vibrant shades of indigo and marigold. In the weeks since her art exhibition, she had begun experimenting with headscarves, reclaiming her identity on her own terms. Today's wrap wasn't just a fashion statement. It was armor. It was voice. Grace Yamada stood and approached the jury box with composed precision. Her navy suit was perfectly pressed, her expression calm but resolute. Arielle Daniels entered Lakeside Middle School on February 15th, Grace began. She was a 12-year-old child, entrusted to the care of adults whose duty was to protect her. She let that truth settle before continuing. By lunchtime, she had been violated, physically and emotionally, by one of those adults. Her dignity stripped, her condition mocked, her voice taken. Grace moved slowly, deliberately. The defense has spent this trial focusing on policies, procedures, and bureaucratic delegation. They have pointed fingers at the nurse, at the principal, even at the rules themselves. They've spoken about dress codes, about compliance, about order. She turned and glanced at Arielle, then faced the jury again. But this case was never about a dress code. It was never about rules. Her voice, still measured, hardened slightly. This was about power, and the choice to abuse it. She stepped closer, locking eyes with each juror. Miss Rourke didn't merely enforce a policy. She punished a child because of who her mother was, because of a grudge, because of something so petty and poisonous it's difficult to believe an adult could carry it. Grace paused, drawing a quiet breath. And yet she did. She raised a hand gently, indicating the mountain of evidence. Arielle's medical documents, the buried emails, the security footage, the testimonies. We have shown you the truth, documented, witnessed, undeniable. She softened again. And you heard Arielle speak. You saw her strength, her honesty, her pain. You heard how her voice vanished for days, how her only outlet became her sketchbook. A long silence. Then, the defense would like you to believe this was a misunderstanding, a lapse in judgment, but the evidence tells a different story. Grace leaned forward one final time, her voice steady as steel. This is a story of calculated cruelty, a cover-up from those entrusted with leadership, and a young girl who now carries scars that no child should ever have to explain. Grace returned to the counsel's table, her hand trembling slightly as she picked up a printed image of Arielle. In it, the bald girl stood solemnly among scorched school desks, her figure centered in a chaos of charred wood and flame-colored shadows. Arielle had titled the piece, "What Remains." "It's about what was taken from her," Grace said, turning to the jury, "but more importantly, what could never be taken. Her dignity, her creativity, her voice." She carefully set the image down, then let her gaze sweep across the jurors. "Today I ask you to give her something else that cannot be taken away," she said, her voice steady. "Justice." She paused. "As you deliberate, consider this. In a society that claims to protect its most vulnerable, what message will your verdict send to every child who walks through a school door, trusting that the adults inside will keep them safe?" Then Grace stepped back and sat beside Naomi. For the first time in this entire trial, Naomi reached over, and tightly squeezed her hand. The decorated Lieutenant Colonel, so composed throughout, let a flicker of emotion pass between them. The defense rose. Lawrence Whitfield looked polished, unbothered. His bespoke suit and rehearsed expression stood in sharp contrast to the increasingly disheveled appearance of Evelyn Rourke, who sat slumped beside him, avoided by even her own legal team. "Ladies and gentlemen," Whitfield began, pacing slowly, "this case is about trust, but not in the way Ms. Yamada has framed it." He gestured broadly. "It is about the trust we place in teachers, the trust we must give them to maintain discipline in chaotic, overcrowded, underfunded classrooms, where respect is earned daily and order is fragile." He paused by the jury box. Was Ms. Rourke perfect that day? No. She'll be the first to admit that her actions were heavy-handed, but they were not cruel, they were not malicious. She believed, rightly or wrongly, that she was following the rules. A few jurors shifted in their seats. Some averted their gaze. The defense's words felt thin now, faint echoes in a room that had heard too much. The district attorney gave his own closing, trying to distance the administration from Ms. Rohr's decisions. He expressed deep regret for the misunderstanding, but made no admission of guilt. Then the courtroom fell silent as Judge Barnes turned to the jury. "You've heard the evidence. You've listened to the arguments. Now it's your duty to weigh the facts and deliver a verdict on each count. Take the time you need." As the jury filed out, a quiet tension fell over the room. Naomi reached for Arielle's hand. On her other side, Eric silently grasped hers, an unbreakable chain of resilience. "What happens now?" Arielle whispered, more words than she'd spoken in weeks. "We wait," Eric said gently. "And whatever happens, we face it together." Time stretched unbearably. The jury stayed out for hours. Sandwiches and water were brought to the Daniels family, but no one ate. Grace reviewed notes. Naomi remained still. Arielle clutched her sketchbook to her chest. Outside, the city blurred under soft, steady rain. Protesters huddled beneath umbrellas, their signs drooping, but their presence unwavering. Satellite vans lined the curbs, reporters broadcasting updates from under makeshift tarps. Then, just past 4 o'clock, the bailiff entered. "The jury has reached a verdict," he announced. The courtroom refilled with sudden purpose. Every seat taken, every breath held. The 12 jurors entered solemnly. Their expressions revealed nothing. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Barnes asked. A middle-aged black woman, juror number 4, stood. "We have, Your Honor." She handed the paper to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. Judge Barnes read silently. Her face was unreadable. Then she nodded. "Will the foreperson please stand?" "In the case of Daniels v. Lakeside School District, Evelyn Rourke and Thomas Wexley," the woman read aloud, "we find the defendant, Evelyn Rourke, liable for assault and battery of a minor." A ripple passed through the room. Naomi closed her eyes. Arielle exhaled softly. Eric stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. "And on the charge of administrative negligence by the Lakeside School District and Thomas Wexley," she continued, "we find the defendants liable for intentional infliction of emotional distress." The forewoman turned to the final page. "And on the count of civil rights violations against all named defendants," she paused, "we find all defendants liable." A collective gasp filled the courtroom. Someone whispered, "Yes," beneath their breath. Eric's eyes welled with tears. Naomi remained outwardly calm, but her hand tightened around Arielle's. Arielle lowered her head and smiled for the first time in days. Judge Barnes continued, "Has the jury determined damages?" "We have, Your Honor. We award $2 million for future medical care, counseling, and education accommodations." The room held still as the juror lifted her voice for the final line. We also award $3 million in punitive damages for willful misconduct and institutional failure. Gasps, applause, reporters surged toward the doors. Inside the courtroom, Naomi turned to her daughter. "It's over, sweetheart," she whispered. "We did it." Arielle nodded. "No, Mom," she said softly. "We started it. We award punitive damages in the amount of $5 million to the county," the jury foreman read aloud. $1 million personally to Principal Wexley and $2 million to Ms. Evelyn Rourke. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. $10 million. One of the largest judgments ever delivered for an ethics violation in the history of the state's public school system. Judge Barnes' voice rang out. "This court finds in favor of the plaintiff on all counts. The jury is thanked and formally dismissed." A murmur spread as people began to stir in their seats. Reporters rushed to send texts. Spectators sat stunned. But at the defense table, Evelyn Rourke sat motionless, her face drained of color, her mouth slightly open. Whatever defiance she once had was gone. Wexley didn't react. He just stared ahead, his professional life quietly crumbling beneath the weight of accountability. Across the aisle, county attorneys reached for their phones, likely to notify the sheriff's office. Grace Yamada turned to the Daniels family. Her polished courtroom demeanor softened into a smile of deep, quiet satisfaction. "Congratulations," she said, closing her folder. "Justice was served today." "Thank you," Naomi replied, her military edge relaxed for the first time in weeks. "For everything." The courtroom began to empty. That's when a man in a dark suit approached their table, flashing a badge discreetly. "Detective Michael Sullivan, Special Victims Unit," he said calmly, then turned to Ms. Rourke. "Miss Rourke, I need you to come with me." Evelyn blinked. "What? Why?" "We're reopening 2 previous complaints, cases involving former students," Sullivan replied matter-of-factly. "Based on today's ruling and new witness statements, the district attorney has approved formal charges, aggravated assault and child endangerment." Whitfield leapt to his feet. "My client will not go anywhere without due preparation." Detective Sullivan cut him off and unfolded the arrest warrant. "She can walk out voluntarily or be escorted in cuffs in front of every camera outside. Her choice." Evelyn stood, shaking. Her arrogance collapsed beneath the weight of consequences long overdue. As she was led toward the side exit, she glanced over her shoulder, one final time at Arielle. Their eyes met. Arielle didn't flinch. She didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't scowl. She just looked at her, straight through her. And in that moment, a child stood tall, while the adult who tried to break her was led away in shame. It was quiet, wordless, and somehow it was the loudest moment of the entire trial.